Hi, welcome to Hekate's Crossing as we continue with the Celestine Prophecy. Right, the room had no phone, but a lodge attendant I saw in the hallway assured me someone would knock on my door at 5 a.m. sharp. I lay down and thought for a few minutes. The afternoon had been long and full, and I understood Will's silence. He wanted me to experience the third insight in my own way. The next thing I knew, someone was banging on the door. I looked at my watch, 5 a.m. When the attendant knocked again, I said thank you, in a voice loud enough for him to hear, then rose and looked out the small frame window. The only sign of the morning was a pale glow of light towards the east. I walked down the hall and showered, then dressed quickly and went downstairs. The dining room was open, and a surprising number of people were moving about. I ate only fruit and hurried outside. Strands of fog drifted across the grounds and clung to the distant meadows. Songbirds called one another from the trees. As I walked away from the lodge, the very top of the sun breached the horizon toward the east. The colour was spectacular. The sky was a deep blue above the bright peach horizon. I arrived at the knoll 15 minutes early, so I sat down and leaned against the trunk of a large tree, fascinated by the web of nailed branches growing out above my head. In a few minutes I heard someone walking towards me to walk along the path, and I looked away expecting to see Sarah. Instead, I saw someone I didn't know, a man in his mid-40s. He left the path and walked my way without noticing me. When he was within 10 feet, he saw me with a start, which made me flinch also. "Oh, hello," he said in a rich Brooklyn accent. He was dressed in jeans and hiking boots and looked exceptionally fit and athletic. His hair was curly and receding. I nodded. "Sorry about walking up on you so suddenly," he said. "No problem." He told me his name was Phil Stone, and I told him who I was and that I was waiting for a friend. "You must be doing some research here," I added. "Not really," he replied. "I work for the University of Southern California. We're doing studies in another province on the rain and take a break. On the rainforest, sorry. We're doing studies in another province on the rainforest depletion, but whenever I get the chance, I drive over here and take a break. I like hanging out where the forests are so different." He looked around. "Do you realize some of the trees here are close to 500 years old? This is truly a virgin forest, a rare thing. Everything is a perfect balance, larger trees filtering the sunlight, allowing a multitude of tropical plant life to thrive underneath. The plant life in a rainforest is old too, but it grows differently. It's basically jungle. This is more like what an old forest looks like in a temperature zone, such as in the United States. "I've never seen anything like this there," I said. "I know," he said. "Only a few remain. Most of the ones I know of were sold by the government to lumber interests, as though all they could see in a forest like this is a board feet of lumber. Damn shame that anyone would mess with a place like this. Look at the energy." "You can see the energy here?" I asked. He looked at me closely as though deciding whether to elaborate. "Yes, I can," he said finally. "Well, I haven't been able to," I said. "I tried yesterday when they were meditating with plants at the garden." "Oh, I couldn't see fields that large at first either," he said. "I had to start by looking at my fingers." "How do you mean?" "Let's move over there," he said, pointing to an area where the trees parted slightly and blue sky showed through overhead. "I'll show you." When we arrived, he said, "Lean back and touch the tips of your index fingers together. Keep the blue sky in the background. Now separate the tips about an inch and look at the area directly between them. What do you see?" "Just on the lens of my eye." "Ignore that," he said. "Take your eyes out of focus a little and move the tips closer, then further apart." As he talked, I moved my fingers around, unsure what he meant by taking my eyes out of focus. I finally placed my gaze vaguely on the area between my fingers. Both fingertips went slightly blurry, and as this happened, I saw something like strands of smoke stretching between the tips. "Good grief," I said, and explained what I saw. That's it," he said. "Now just play with that a while." I touched all four fingers together, then my palms and forearms. In each case, I continued to see streaks of energy between the body parts. I dropped my arms and looked at Phil. "Oh, you want to see mine?" he asked. He stood up, stepped back a few feet, positioning his head and torso so the sky would be directly behind him. I tried for a few minutes, but a noise behind us broke my concentration. I turned and saw Sarah. Phil stepped forward and grinned broadly. "Is this the person you've been waiting for?" As Sarah approached, she too was smiling. "Hey, I know you," she said, pointing at Phil. They embraced warmly, then Sarah looked at me and said, "Sorry I'm late. My mental alarm didn't go off for some reason, but now I guess I know why. It gave you two a chance to talk. What have you been doing?" "He just learned how to see the fields between his fingers," Phil said. Sarah looked at me. Last year, Phil and I were up here at this very spot learning to do the same thing. She glanced at Phil. Let's put our backs together. Maybe he can see the energy between us. They stood back in front of me. I suggested they move closer, and they stepped toward me until the space between us was about 4 feet. They were silhouetted against the sky, which was still a dark blue in that direction. To my surprise, the space between them looked lighter. It was yellow, or a yellowish pink. He sees it, Phil said, reading my expression. Sarah turned and grabbed Phil by the arm, and they slowly stepped away from me so their bodies were perhaps 10 feet away. Surrounding their upper torsos was a whitish pink field of energy. Okay, Sarah said seriously. She had walked over and crouched down beside me. Now look at the scene here, the beauty. I was immediately awed by the shapes and forms around me. I seemed to be able to focus on each of the massive oaks in a total way, not merely on one part, but on the whole form at once. I was immediately struck by the unique shape and configuration of limbs each displayed. I looked from one to the other, turning all around. Doing this somehow increased the feeling of presence each oak exuded to me, as though I was seeing them for the first time, or at least fully appreciating them for the first time. Suddenly, the tropical foliage underneath the huge trees attracted my attention. I again looked at the unique form each plant exhibited. I also noticed the way each type of plant grew together with others of its own kind. What struck me as a little like community. For instance, the tall banana tree type plants were often encircled by small philodendrons, who themselves were poised among even smaller fern-like plants. When I looked at these mini environments, I was again struck by their uniqueness of outline and presence. Less than 10 feet away, a particular foliage plant caught my eye. I had often owned just this type as a house plant, a particular variegated form of philodendron. Dark green, its foliage branched out to about 4 feet in diameter. The shape of this plant seemed perfect, healthy, and vibrant. Yeah, focus on that one but loosely, Sarah said. As I did so, I played with the focus of my eyes. At one point, I tried to focus on the space 6 inches to one side of each physical part of the plant. Gradually, I began to pick up glimpses of light. Then, with a single adjustment of my focus, I could see a bubble of white light encircling the plant. I'm seeing something now, I said. Look around some, Sarah said. I stepped back in shock. Round each plant within my vision was a field of whitish light, visible yet totally transparent, so that none of the plant's colour or form was obscure. I realized that what I was seeing was an extension of each plant's unique beauty. It was as though at first I'd seen the plants, then I'd seen their uniqueness and presence, and then something had amplified in the pure beauty of their physical expression, at which time I'd seen the energy fields. See if you can see this, Sarah said. She sat down in front of me and faced the philodendron. A plume of the whitish light encircling her body erupted outward and engulfed the philodendron. The diameter of the plant's aura energy field, in turn, broadened by several feet. Damn, I explained, which provoked laughter between the two friends. Soon I was laughing myself, conscious of the peculiarity of what was happening, but feeling absolutely no uneasiness at seeing quite readily phenomena I'd totally doubted minutes earlier. I realized that the perception of the fields, rather than invoking a surrealistic sensation, actually made the things about me seem more solid and real than before. Yet at the same time, everything around me seemed so different. The only reference I had to the experience was perhaps a movie which enhanced the colour of a forest in order to make it seem mystical and enchanted. The plants, the leaves, the sky now all stood out with a presence and a slight shimmer that suggested life there and perhaps consciousness. Perhaps beyond our ordinary assumption, after seeing this, there would be no way to take a forest for granted again. I looked at Phil. Sit down and put your energy on the philodendron. I said, I'd like to compare. Phil appeared perplexed. I can't do it, he said. I don't know why. Some people can and some can't, she said. We haven't figured it out. Marjorie has to screen her graduate students to see who can do it. A couple of psychologists are trying to correlate this ability with personality characteristics. So far, no one knows. Okay, as we continue. Right. So, some people can and some can't, she said. We haven't figured it out. Marjorie has to screen her graduate students to see who can do it. A couple of psychologists are trying to correlate this ability with personality characteristics, but so far no one knows. Let me try it, I said. Okay, go ahead, Sarah replied. I sat down again and faced the plant. Sarah and Phil stood at right angles to me. Okay, how do I begin? Just focus your attention on the plant as though to inflate it with your energy, Sarah said. I looked at the plant and imagined energy swelling up inside it. Then after a few minutes I looked over at the two. Sorry, Sarah said wryly. You're obviously not one of the chosen few. I shot a mock frown at Phil. Angry voices from the path below interrupted our conversation. Through the trees we could see a group of men passing, talking harshly among themselves. Who are those people? Phil asked, looking at Sarah. I don't know, she said. More folks upset with what we're doing, I guess. I looked back at the forest around us. Everything appeared ordinary again. Hey, I can't see the energy fields anymore. Some things bring you right down, don't they? Sarah remarked. Phil smiled and patted my shoulder. You can do it again any time now. It's just like riding a bicycle. All you have to do is see the beauty and then extend from there. I suddenly remembered to check the time. The sun was much higher in the sky, and a light mid-morning breeze swayed the trees. My watch showed 7:50 a.m. I guess I'd better head back, I said. Sarah and Phil joined me. As we walked, I looked back at the wooded hillside. That's one beautiful place, I said. Too bad there aren't more places like this in the States. Once you see the energy fields in other areas, Phil said, you'll realize just how dynamic this forest is. Look at these oaks. They are very rare in Peru, but they grow here in Vinciente. A cut forest, especially one that's been stripped of hardwoods in order to grow pines for profit, has a very low energy field. And a city, except for the people, has a different kind of energy altogether. I tried to focus on the plants along the path, but the act of walking disrupted my concentration. You're sure I'll see these fields again? I said. Absolutely, Sarah replied. I've never heard of anyone failing to duplicate the experience once they've seen them initially. We had a research ophthalmologist come through here once, and he got all excited after he learnt to see the fields. Turned out he'd been working with certain sight abnormalities, including forms of colour blindness, and concluded that some people have what he called lazy receptors in their eyes. He had taught people how to see colours they'd never experienced before. According to him, seeing energy fields was just a matter of doing the same thing, of waking up other dormant receptors, somewhere that everyone theoretically can do. I wish I lived near a place like this, I said. Don't we all, Phil replied, then looked around at me at Sarah. Is Dr. Haynes still here? Yes, Sarah said. He can't leave. Phil looked at me. Now there's a guy who's doing some interesting research on what this energy can do for you. Yeah, I said. I talked with him yesterday. The last time I was here, Phil continued, he was telling me about a study he would like to conduct in which he would look at the physical effects of merely being near certain high energy environments, such as that forest back there. He would use the same measurements of organ efficiency and output to see the effect. Well, I already know the effect, Sarah said. Whenever I drive into this estate, I begin to feel better. Everything is amplified. I seem stronger. I can think more clearly and quickly. And the insights I have into all of this and how it relates to my work in physics is amazing. What are you working on? I asked. Do you remember me telling you about the perplexing experiments in particle physics, during which these little bits of atoms appear whenever the scientists expected them to be? Yes. Well, I've tried to expand this idea a bit with some experiments of my own. Not to solve the problem these guys were working on in subatomic particles, but to explore questions I told you about before. To what extent does the physical universe as a whole, since it is made up of the same basic energy, respond to our expectations? To what extent do our expectations create all the things that happen to us? The coincidences, you mean? Yes, think of the events of your life. The old Newtonian idea is that everything happens by chance, that one can make good decisions and be prepared, but that every event has its own line of causation independent of our attitude. After the recent discoveries of modern physics, we may legitimately ask if the universe is more dynamic than that. Perhaps the universe runs mechanistically as a basic operation, but then also subtly responds to the mental energy we project out into it. I mean, why not? If we can make plants grow faster, maybe we can make certain events come faster or slower, depending on how we think. Does the manuscript talk about any of this? Sarah smiled at me. Of course. That's where we're getting these ideas. She began to dig around in her pack as we walked, finally pulling out a folder. Here's your copy, she said. I glanced at it briefly and placed it in my pocket. We were crossing the bridge, and I hesitated a moment, observing the colours and forms of the plants around me. I altered my focus and immediately saw the energy fields around everything in my view. Both Sarah and Phil had wide fields which seemed to be tinted yellow-green, though Sarah's field occasionally flashed with a pinkish colour. Suddenly they both stopped and looked intently up the trail. Ahead, about 50 feet, a man walked quickly towards us. A sensation of anxiety filled my stomach, but I was determined to maintain my view of the energy. As he approached, I recognized him. He was the taller of the scientists from the University of Peru, who had asked for directions the day before. Around him I could detect a layer of red. When he walked up to us, he turned to Sarah and condescendingly said, "You're a scientist, aren't you?" "That's right," Sarah replied. "Then how can you tolerate this kind of science? I've seen these gardens, and I can't believe the sloppiness. You people haven't controlled for anything. There could be many explanations for certain plants growing larger." "Controlling for everything is impossible, sir. We're looking for general tendencies." I could detect an edge growing in Sarah's voice. "But postulating some usually visible energy that underlines the chemistry of living things, that's absurd. You have no proof." "Proof is what we're looking for." "But how can you postulate the existence of anything before you get some proof?" The voices of both individuals sounded angry now, but I was only vaguely listening. What consumed my attention was the dynamics of the energy fields. When the discussion began, Phil and I backed up a few feet, and Sarah and the taller man had squared off, facing each other, with a distance of about 4 feet between them. Immediately, both the energy fields that seemed to grow more dense and excited, somehow as though from an inner vibration. As the conversation progressed, their fields began to intermingle. When one of them made a point, his field would create a movement, which seemed to suck at the other's field, with what appeared to be a kind of vacuum maneuver. But then, as the other person made his rebuttal, the energy would move back in his direction. In terms of the dynamic of energy fields, winning the point seemed to mean capturing part of the opponent's field and pulling it into oneself. "Besides," Sarah was saying to the man, "we have observed the phenomena we're trying to understand." The man gave Sarah a disdainful look. "Then you're insane as well as incompetent," he said, and walked away. "You're a dinosaur," Sarah shouted, which made Phil and me laugh. Sarah, however, was still tense. "These people can make me angry," Sarah said as she resumed our walk along the path. "Forget it," Phil said. "These kind of people come around sometimes." "But why so many?" Sarah asked. "And why right now?" As we walked up on to the lodge, I could see Will at the jeep. Excuse me. As we walked up to the lodge, I could see Will at the jeep. Doors of the vehicle were open and the gear was spread out on top of the hood. He saw me immediately and motioned for me to come over. "Well, it looks like I'm about to take off," I said. My comment broke a 10-minute silence which had begun when I tried to explain what I'd seen happen to Sarah's energy during the argument. Evidently, I'd not put it very well because my comments had provoked only blank stares and had cast us all into a long period of self-absorption. "It's been nice meeting you," Sarah said, offering her hands. Phil was looking towards the jeep. "Is that Will James?" he asked. "Is he the guy you're travelling with?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" "I just wondered. I've seen him around. He knows the owner of this place and was one of the early group that first encouraged the research on the energy fields here." "Come on up and meet him," I said. "No, I have to go," he said. "I'll see you around here later on. I know you won't be able to stay away." "No doubt," I said. Sarah interjected that she too needed to go and that I could contact her through the lodge. I delayed them for a few more minutes, expressing my thanks for the lessons. Sarah's expression grew serious. Seeing the energy, grasping this new way of perceiving the physical world, grows through a kind of contagion. We don't understand it, but when a person hangs out with others who see this energy, usually they begin to see it too. So go show it to someone else." I nodded and then hurried up to the jeep. Will greeted me with a smile. "Are you about ready?" I asked. "Almost," he said. "How did the morning go?" "Interesting," I said. "I've got a lot to talk to you about." "You'd better save it for now," he said. "We need to get out of here. Things are looking unfriendly." I walked closer to him. "What's going on?" I asked. "Nothing too serious," he said. "I'll explain later. Get your stuff." I walked into the lodge and picked up a few items I had left in my room. Will had told me earlier there would be no charge courtesy of the owner. So I walked down to the desk and handed the clerk my key and walked back outside to the jeep. Will was under the hood checking something and he slammed it closed as I walked up. "Okay," he said, "let's go." We drove out of the parking lot, then down the drive toward the main road. Several cars were leaving at the same time. "What's happening?" I asked Will. "A group of local officials," he replied, "along with some scientific types, have complained about the people associated with the conference centre. They're not alleging that anything illegal is going on. just that some of the folks hanging around here may be what they called undesirable, not legitimate scientists. These officials would cause a lot of trouble, and that could effectively put the lodge out of business. I looked at him blankly, and he continued, You see, this lodge normally has several groups booked at any one time. Only a small number have anything to do with research associated with the manuscript. The others are groups focused on their own disciplines, who come down here for the beauty. If the officials get too ugly and create a negative climate, these groups will stop meeting here. But I thought you said the local officials wouldn't tamper with the tourist money coming into Vinciente. I didn't think they would. Someone has them nervous about the manuscript. Did anyone at the gardens understand what was occurring? No, not really, I said. They were just wondering why all of a sudden more angry people were around. Will remained silent. We drove out of the gate and turned southeast. A minute later we took another road which headed due east, toward the mountain range in the distance. We'll be going right by the gardens, Will said after a while. Ahead I saw the plots, first metal building. As we came alongside, the door opened and I met eyes with a person coming out. It was Marjorie. She smiled and turned towards me as we passed our gaze, lingering for a long moment. Who was that? Will asked. A woman I met yesterday, I answered. He nodded, then changed the subject. Did you get a look at the third insight? I was given a copy. Will didn't reply, appearing to be lost in thought, so I pulled out the translation and found where I'd stopped reading. From there, the third insight elaborated on the nature of beauty, describing the perception as the one through which humans would eventually learn to observe energy fields. Once this occurred, it said, then our understanding of the physical universe would quickly transform. For instance, we would begin to eat more foods which were still alive with this energy, and we would become conscious that certain localities radiate more energy than others, the highest radiation coming from old natural environments, especially forests. I was about to read the final pages when Will suddenly spoke. Tell me what you experienced back at the gardens, he said. As best as I could, I related in detail the events of the 2 days, including the people I'd met. When I told him of the encounter with Marjorie, he looked at me and smiled. How much did you talk to these people about the other insights, and how these insights relate to what they're doing in the gardens, he asked. I didn't mention them at all, I replied. I didn't trust them at first, and later I just figured they knew more than me. I think you could have given them some important information had you been perfectly honest with them. What kind of information? He looked at me warmly. Only you know that. I was at loss for words. So I looked out at the landscape. The terrain was growing increasingly hilly and rocky. Large granite outcrops overhung the road. What do you make of seeing Marjorie again as we passed the gardens? Will asked. I started to say just coincidence, but instead said, I don't know. What do you think? I don't think anything happens by coincidence. To me, it means you two have unfinished business, something you need to say to each other that you didn't. The idea intrigued me, but disturbed me as well. I had been accused all my life of remaining too distant, of asking questions but not expressing opinions or committing to a position. Why, I wondered, was this coming up again now? I also noticed that I was beginning to feel differently. At Vinciente, I felt adventurous and competent, and now I was feeling what could only be called a growing depression, mixed with anxiety. Now you've made me depressed, I said. He laughed loudly, then replied, It wasn't me. It was the effect of leaving the Vinciente estate. The energy at the place makes you high as a kite. Why do you think all those scientists been hanging around here years ago? They don't have a clue as to why they like it so much. He turned to look directly at me. But we do, don't we? He checked the road, then looked at me again, his face full of regard. You have to crank up your own energy when you leave a place like that. I just looked at him, puzzled. He gave me a reassuring smile. Afterward, we were both silent for perhaps a mile, when he said, Tell me more about what happened at the gardens. I continued the story. When I described as actually seeing energy fields, he looked at me with amazement but said nothing. Can you see these fields? I asked. He shot me a glance. Yes, he said. Go on. I related the story without interruption until I came to Sarah's argument with the Peruvian scientist and the dynamics of the energy fields during the confrontations. What did Sarah and Will say about that? He asked. Nothing, I said. They didn't seem to have a frame of reference for it. Didn't think so, Will said. So fascinated with the third insight. They haven't yet gone forward. How humans compete for energy is the fourth insight. Compete for energy, I asked. He merely smiled, nodding toward the translation I was holding. I picked up where I'd left off. The text pointed clearly to the fourth insight. It said that eventually humans would see the universe as comprised of one dynamic energy, an energy that can sustain us and respond to our expectations. Yet, we would also see that we have been disconnected from the larger source of this energy, that we have cut ourselves off and so have felt weak and insecure and lacking. In the face of this deficit, we humans have always sought to increase our personal energy in the only manner we have known, by seeking to psychologically steal it from others, an unconscious competition that underlies all human conflict in the world. Okay, that's it from me. Don't forget to check the links down below, check the links on my channel, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded.